morning or good afternoon. I'm Julie Broadway, president at the American Horse Council. It's a beautiful day in Washington, D.C., and I was just sharing with our guest that I'm very envious that he's been out for a walk over lunch. It looks lovely outside. We're going to give this just a minute to see if we have any kind of stragglers that come, and then we'll get started. I would remind you that we are recording this, so if you need to leave early or you want to hear it again, you can always go to our website in about a day or so, and you can hear the replay. And if you would make certain that you're on mute, that's always beneficial when we're recording, so we don't pick up a whole lot of background noise. As we go along, if you have questions, feel free to put those in the chat or jot them down, because we'll have some open Q&A at the end of the presentation. So you have two different ways you can get your questions in. So we're very excited to have you with us today. So just give me a second. We'll see if you have any last minute folks. All right, well, we're going to get started. Again, I'm Julie Broadway, president at the American Horse Council. We're delighted to have you with us, and we are delighted to have our guest today, which is Walt Boatright from the American Farm Bureau Federation. Some of you may have had the opportunity at our annual conference in June to hear Walt, and he gave a very informative and very robust conversation around this specific topic, and we liked it so much we decided we would have him back so that others could benefit from this. So let me tell you a little bit about him. He joined the American Farm Bureau Federation as Director of Government Affairs in November of 2022. In his role, his portfolio is very wide and deep. He covers farm labor, pesticides, food safety, biotech, and specialty crops. It also includes legislative initiatives in Congress, as well as engagement with the U.S. Department of Labor, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. He works really closely with state farm bureaus and policymakers to try to accomplish their main goals and objectives. And he represents the organization in a number of coalitions, including the Agricultural Workforce Coalition, the Pesticide Policy Coalition, the Minor Crop Farm Alliance, and the Ag Biotech Alliance, and lastly, the Commodity Liaison Committee of the IR4 project. And prior to coming to Washington to work for American Farm Bureau Federation, he led national affairs for the Florida Farm Bureau for a number of years. So he grew up in one of our top 3 horse states. He's from the Florida area. As you guys know, Texas, California, and Florida are our top 3, and we're delighted to have Walt with us. So with that, I'll hand it to him.
Thank you, Julie. Very kind intro, and very much appreciate the chance to rejoin your members and spend a little time talking about what has been the biggest topic for a while now within Farm Bureau circles, and that's been, our troubles around ag labor, the challenges, but also the opportunities. So looking forward to re-engaging with y'all and hopefully shedding a little light on what we see. And since our last conversation, share some positive developments. So excited to be able to do that. I'm going to share my screen real briefly. Hopefully y'all can see it in presentation mode, I hope. And we should be off to the races. So clearly, just want to get into it, or at least set the stage very quickly. We have, as an industry, not just Farm Bureau, but as an agriculture industry, really approached reform from a two-pronged effort. The first prong is how do you really deal with the existing workforce, which has been an ongoing theme we've seen over the past 6 months with this administration in terms of their immigration enforcement measures. We certainly have an unauthorized workforce in agriculture. Latest estimates show about 40% of the agricultural workforce is unauthorized in the United States. And we've been dealing really with that for 40 years since the last piece of immigration legislation. How do we truly provide a legal status for those folks who have spent really decades alongside our farmers and ranchers doing that good work and raising their family and contributing to society? But how do we also have an honest conversation about improving the future flow of workers coming into this country? Because guess what? Those workers, that existing workforce is aging out, and they're not being refilled with domestic workers coming in, and that's what brings in the H-2A and H-2B programs. But those are often programs of necessity, of last resort for many of our members. So how can we improve those systems to where they're working better and representing 2025 agriculture rather than 1987 agriculture? So I'd ask you to think about those two prongs: existing workforce, future flow, and how we can effectively achieve reforms and solutions for those over the next 12 to 18 months. So want to jump into a little bit of background. The first, of course, is, how much we spend on labor. These latest numbers from 2020 show about $42 billion in U.S. agriculture spent on hired labor. We could stand to probably update those numbers, but know that it is a sizable amount of farm inputs clearly to be utilizing farm labor. And of course, if you're in certain sectors, that cost is going to be higher. Anywhere around 25 to 30% of your input costs are going to be associated with that if you are in high labor intensive agriculture. Obviously, I think a major contributor to that is obviously the volume of labor that you need, but it's also the fact that we've seen higher adoption rates of AH2A program, which has elevated those costs. And then you see dairies who don't have access to an H2A program. You see them on the lower end of the scale, just hovering around 10% of their input values, and then all farms around that same factor there. I think it's also important, as we talk a little bit more about this conversation, about this issue, is that the political sentiment around this issue. We are in 2025 following the 2024 election, when this administration, President Trump, campaigned on successfully a need to really crank down on illegal immigration and enhance enforcement measures. We've seen the sentiment, not just with Republicans, but also with independents and Democrats. We've seen them essentially follow suit or mirror much of that. U.S. voters are preferring less immigration, not just illegal immigration, but less immigration in the United States. And you see that trending downward across all political persuasions in this graph. Democrats at 86%, independents at 66%, and Republicans naturally a little sharper downturn at 39%. And that's over a span of many years. But if you look at just year over year from 2023 to 2024, you also see huge double-digit spikes in anti-immigration sentiment. Across all political persuasions. Democrats 10% swing, independents at 11% swing, and then Republicans obviously a little larger than that. So what does that mean for us in agriculture? What does that mean when we go to talk to our member of Congress about this issue, or staff? It means that our job becomes harder to break through and talk about having a real candid conversation about our challenges in the agricultural sector and solutions that will help mitigate against those impacts. So that means we've got to do better at our jobs in advocating on behalf of an industry we love, and to keep it sustainable through sound labor policy. So let's talk about the players in this administration. We have three agencies that really have direct or indirect oversight over this labor issue. Secretary Kristi Noem, Department of Homeland Security Secretary, she is responsible for enforcing the president's immigration agenda at Department of Homeland Security. She's also probably, of these three women, probably the most attuned to agricultural needs in the United States. She comes from a farming background in South Dakota. She actually took over the family farm when her father died in a farming accident. So she truly understands and has very direct experience on farm. Ultimately became a congresswoman from South Dakota, became the governor, and again was elevated to President Trump's cabinet. We also have Secretary Lori Chavez-DeRemer at Department of Labor. And Department of Labor is important because it administers the H-2A program, that temporary seasonal guest worker program that more and more in agriculture are utilizing. She grew up in California, represented Oregon in the United States House, probably more than any other DOL secretary in recent memory has a very strong understanding of our challenges with the H-2A program and the reforms we would like to seek. She was on the House Ag Labor Working Group, helmed and started by G.T. Thompson in the House Agriculture Committee. So we have a good working relationship with her. And then, of course, Secretary Brooke Rollins at USDA. USDA has limited oversight over our issues, but it is important that they have, for years, administered the Farm Labor Survey, which dictates the wage rates paid to H-2A users. So naturally, has not had a lot of policy experience in agriculture, but has gotten up to speed quite quickly between her and her staff. And as with any other administration and any other Secretary of Agriculture, really leaning on them to be a strong advocate within the walls of this administration. So let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is mass deportations. That is by far what we are hearing the most about, hearing concerns and challenges across the country. And certainly early on, we heard a lot about enforcement measures and what that meant on farm. We've seen and still experience some concerns there, but by and large, the most concerns that we've heard is the paralysis that we're seeing amongst our workforces. And that means that we're hearing of workers who just simply, are fearful of the actions that could come their way. And that also means that they're not willing to come up to work, not willing to show up and travel to the grocery store, travel to drop their kids off at school. And that has direct impacts clearly on the ability of America's farm families to be able to keep their farm sustained. So we certainly at Farm Bureau have been working diligently to advocate and share the story of what farm families are experiencing in light of this new enforcement reality. And the goal really is to minimize disruption, right? Is to ensure that folks realize that farm families cannot do what they do, supplying a safe and abundant food supply, without these important essential workers. That was the same categorization we used during the COVID pandemic as we dealt with that, is that farmers and their employees are absolutely essential. And so we must continue to talk about that and be willing to lean into that conversation, not only with policymakers, but our neighbors. You saw those public policy, those charts about public sentiment and what they feel in terms of immigration. We have to be willing to have that conversation with our neighbors, with our fellow churchgoers, and with others in our own communities. So these that you see are the talking points that we've used in terms of mass deportations and how we're using to convey to the administration. Of course, farmers want to do the right thing and follow the law, but our federal government over the past 40 years have let our laws and the enforcement of those laws stagnate to a point to where we've had a growing labor shortage and unworkable visa programs that become our last resort, and it makes it virtually impossible to have a strong, stable system when you have these different components not working well together. And then, of course, that leads to hopefully a natural conversation with those policymakers to say, hey, let's come to the table. Let's be serious about passing a solution that works for agriculture and keeps it sustainable and competitive moving forward. What hasn't done that and hasn't helped in this matter is that we saw a lot of rulemakings in the past 2 to 3 years that amounted to a lot more regulatory burdens on those farm families that were struggling to stay afloat and struggling to maintain a workforce. And all of these rulemakings about 8 or 9 that spanned about 4,000 pages of new rules affecting farmers and ranchers, really challenged their ability to do that, and to keep that. We don't necessarily have time over our webinar today to really go into detail with all of these, but know that it is something that we've tried to aggressively engage with members of Congress to roll back. And there have been efforts to do that, certainly over those past couple of years. The good news is we're starting to see some of the fruits of that labor. So we're looking forward to hopefully getting into a better spot from a regulatory perspective. One area that I do want to flag for your members, Julie, is that we do have, or the administration is considering, a draft heat illness standard across all outdoor occupations, not just agriculture. But this could amount to potentially a sweeping regulatory challenge that covers a lot of different industries with a lot of different unique needs. And just within agriculture, we're not sure it completely allows for the utmost flexibility to ultimately, first and foremost, even care for those workers appropriately. But in essence, the summary of this is that when the heat index, not the temperature, but the heat index reaches or exceeds 80 degrees on a given day, the employer of this workforce would have to implement a heat injury and illness prevention plan. And that would amount to certain mitigations or requirements on the employer to ensure workers have what they need to be able to prevent or combat heat illness. At that 80-degree threshold, we're talking about drinking water, acclimatization phase-ins if workers have been removed from the workplace for a certain period of time, implementing appropriate worker communication protocols, access to shade, other items. And then we also see those tick up a notch when we start talking about the next threshold at 90 degrees. And those are include, but not exhaustively, mandatory breaks of about 15 minutes every 2 hours, precautions for observation of symptoms, even more robust communication measures like a hazard alert system that's in place. So the good news is that this was only proposed as a draft rule, which means that we have time, and the administration has time to consider whether or not it wishes to move forward with this rule, to amend the draft rule, or to scrap it altogether. We're still having conversations with the administration to determine exactly where it is. It went through that public comment period. It closed January 13th of this year. They did have post-comment period hearings in the summer of this past year where many folks participated, including some of our members. So we're very curious to see what the approach the administration will take. So there's really no ask at this point in time for folks, but it is important to be aware that this has been ongoing. This has been in the works for a couple of years now, and that when we see some potential activity or a potential next step, we'll be certain to share that. But do be aware that this is something that has been considered, and hopefully we can ensure that our industry is taking the necessary precautions. Okay, jumping into the H-2A program. For those of you who aren't aware, I've said it several times, the H-2A program is a seasonal temporary guest worker program that in its current form, established in 1986 when that last immigration legislation was passed, and it basically requires the employer to advertise domestically to prove a need, that they cannot find any domestic workers willing and able to perform this work. And then they petition the Department of Labor with that proof that they advertise domestically. And then they start the process of procuring willing guest workers from other countries, eligible countries, to come in who receive a background check, who go through an interview process at the consulate, and then arrive at their established date of need, ideally. Sometimes there are delays in that system, which cause some real problems. But as a part of this program, to participate in this program, you have to pay these workers what's called an adverse effect wage rate, and housing and transportation at no cost to that worker. So we'll see some of those costs in the next slide, but it gives you a good background as to why and what the challenges may be with using this program. What you see in front of you is the H-2A position certified in fiscal year 2024, 380,000 positions across the country. And you see these positions broken down by state. Florida, my home state, is #1 H-2A state in the country at about 47,000 positions needed. California, Washington State, North Carolina, and Georgia round out the top 5. What do all 5 of those states have in common, as well as some of those other high H-2A states? High specialty crop, labor-intensive agriculture, which fits the need and the general profile for the type of work that these H-2A workers are doing. They're involved in a highly seasonal crop where these workers come in. They help plant, prune, harvest, maintain, and then get that crop to its next stage in the process. Well, we often get questions from policymakers when we share this. We're like, okay, well, if it's such a onerous program, then why do we have so many folks using it, and why does it continue to increase every year? And that's simple. Is that as I said earlier, we're seeing that domestic workforce age out. We don't have Americans or domestic workers coming in to backfill those positions. So this becomes, for those who are eligible in that seasonal type work, this becomes their last resort. Otherwise, you start to see people shift to more mechanized crops, or maybe even get out of farming altogether. But when they do enter this program, they realize how bureaucratic it is, how costly it is, and it really becomes a challenge. Now, that being said, there are many people who wouldn't be in agriculture today if not for the H-2A program helping to fill that gap. So it's a complicated situation to share, but it is the reality that we live in here. This is the regional representation of the wage rate that we are required to pay H-2A workers. And it is broken up by region because it has, up until this point, been determined by data procured through the Farm Labor Survey administered by by USDA. And from that survey, it collects wages 4 times a year. And then that wage data is synthesized and utilized by the statisticians at USDA to determine this regional wage rate that is basically arbitrarily the way that the Farm Labor Survey is broken up by these states, but that's how the adverse effect wage rate is therefore determined, is that once that data is published in November, then DOL sees that data, and largely without fail, DOL takes that data and makes it the adverse effect wage rate for the H-2A program for the following year. So DOL will usually publish those wage rates in December, and then they will become effective January 1. These wage rates, as you see, vary. You have on the low end in the Delta region about 1483, went up about 2.1% from last year. And then you see on the high end, Hawaii, at 2008, that was a 7% increase, but then you see California really bumping up to $20 per hour. But it's important to note the percent differences as well, because one of the criticisms we have is not only how high it is, but how unpredictable and how it fluctuates rapidly from year to year, often with little to no reason. Florida saw the highest increase at nearly 10% last year. You saw the Southeast at 9.5%, and then Indiana, Illinois, and Ohio at 7.6%. You saw the Great Lakes region decrease by about 2%, which rarely happens, but it does happen occasionally. So it's hard to predict what will happen. But as we start getting closer to November, our folks are starting to get nervous about what the new wage rates could be. And this, of course, wage rate does not factor in housing and transportation that employers have to pay. So if you think about that and factor that in based on where you live and the cost of living, you could see that be potentially $5 to $10 more per hour as an effective rate that you're paying for these workers. And just to put a finer point on it, this graph shows the increases in the adverse effect wage rate compared to the employment cost index, which is effectively a measure of inflation. And you see that AWR has increased 8 of the past 10 years, higher than even the rate of inflation, even in the high inflation years of COVID and immediately afterwards. So we often utilize this data and share with policymakers that, hey, you know, if you don't take anything away from this, you can't possibly think that this is using this farm labor survey data is an accurate depiction of what the farm economy can withstand when we start talking about wage rates. So you see those increases quite high, especially in 2019, 2020, starting to see more of a norm of 5 and 6% increases compared to, before then of about, 3 to 4%. And then want to also use these next slides to share with you what even exacerbated cost even more with a rulemaking in 2023 that disaggregated wages based on job function in the H-2A program. So in 2023, a disaggregation rule was finalized that would basically say for certain job functions that an H-2A worker may perform, if that job function has a corresponding SOC code with DOL to a specific job category, and that wage is higher, you have to pay them that wage rate now. And you have to pay it for the duration of the contract, even if that worker may not perform that job function for a significant period of time. So, for instance, take the heavy tractor trailer truck driver in red here, which was by far probably the biggest issue we had with this new rule. If this H-2A worker over the course of their contract had to haul product on a public road, drive one of these trucks and haul it to market, guess what? You're no longer classified as a farm worker in the H-2A program. You would be classified as a heavy and tractor trailer truck driver, and you would be paid that wage rate of $28.08, as opposed to, there is no real average national, but for our purposes, you look at that national average AWR from the Farm Labor Survey, and that's at, $18.12. So that's $10 per hour more that worker is going to get, even if they're not performing that for the majority of their time. So we saw that across construction laborers, first line supervisors, shuttle drivers. If H-2As are driving their fellow co-workers from the housing to the field, they were going to be paid as a shuttle driver, not a farm worker. So that really caused costs to inflate even higher and caused farmers to reconsider and make a lot of really significant changes. Our economists did some analysis about this, comparing the impact on small farms versus large farms. And, initially we thought, definitely the small farm was going to incur, disproportionately, higher costs. We updated that analysis and saw that the costs were actually higher based on how we modeled. Larger farm, about a 13% increase, which you estimated at around 70 farm workers of varying occupations. You look at it for a smaller farm, nearly a 30% increase for that smaller farm, utilizing maybe 10 H-2A farm workers. So naturally, with a lot of concern for small and medium-sized growers, this was just too much, and would just drive consolidation even further with this type of policy in place. I share that bad news, not so good news, with you to share the recent news in the past couple of weeks, which has been good on its face. One is that Louisiana sugarcane growers naturally challenged the rule not long after it was finalized. They've been in litigation since then, but a couple of weeks ago in late August, a Louisiana District Court vacated the rule nationwide, that disaggregation rule. So that means that we return back to the status quo immediately before that 2023 disaggregation rule was finalized. So we're still awaiting the DOL implementing regulations to comply with this, but DOL has signaled that it will comply with this court order. And that is very good news and a big win for industry. The second announcement, long after this court decision was made public, was USDA has moved to discontinue the Farm Labor Survey, period. And it cited in its decision that it was duplicative, that DOL had data that they could use to pull from, and that it was the source of a lot of policy decisions that was affecting the financial sustainability of farmers and ranchers. Now, so that is also tentatively good news, but that also points to the fact that what is DOL going to use to determine a wage rate? And we don't have a good idea or know that exactly. What we do know is that DOL has an interim final rule on the H-2A wage rate methodology awaiting review at OMB to be published in the Federal Register. So we could expect that within the next coming weeks, and that will unveil what their interim final rule may be as we move closer to December and beyond. So lots of good news on its surface, but definitely will yield perhaps some more details in the future. And then finally, to wrap up some other administration actions, is that we have seen DOL announce an Office of Immigration Policy, which intends to sort of be a one-stop shop for employers working through this process. That could be effectively a way to digitize some of the processes we think that haven't been digitized, which has been a complaint for a long time, and get away from snail mail and just do kind of a streamlined application process. That would be a huge win. DOL has also moved to rescind key aspects of the worker protection rule that was finalized in 2024 and was challenged in 3 separate court actions, granted preliminary injunctions of varying scopes, and we were a party to one of those litigation efforts, and now we're seeing some of those onerous aspects of the rule pulled back, so a big win there. And then, of course, we are seeing more enforcement. We are seeing enforcement actions prioritize criminal offenders, and we've encouraged a lot of farmers and ranchers to make sure that they are compliant, but also know their rights according to the law, have a game plan in place, make sure you are going through exercises to ensure your paperwork is accurate and ready to go in the event that ICE may come on site. But of course, we're an advocacy organization representing all of agriculture, so we, our efforts aren't just limited to litigation and regulatory, but our bread and butter, we like to think is legislative and trying to encourage our members of Congress to do this, which is naturally going to be has always been seen as the most durable way to accomplish reform here. So we've been engaged in appropriations efforts for the past couple of years. We've tried, in the absence of reform that really tackles those 2 prongs that we would love to see happen at the same time, we've encouraged more narrower efforts to roll back some rulemakings, to freeze the AWR at certain levels, which we think could be good. Representative Molinar from Michigan has led that effort, most recently on the House side. We're also aware of other bills that have been introduced that we're certainly engaged in. One is, Chairman G.T. Thompson of the House Agriculture Committee, who just made news this morning. There's ongoing interest to see him unveil a bill. We would love to see that happen, and hopefully something we can lend support to. But that's clearly on the chairman's radar. We've seen other bills introduced. The Dignity Act is more comprehensive in nature, introduced by a bipartisan group of members. We've also seen Senator Rand Paul introduce legislation, with specific accommodations for the equine industry in his legislation on the H2A side. So that's another big component when we start talking about. You've heard a lot about the cost of the program, but we're also talking about the fact that the H2A program is limited to seasonal and temporary workers. We got to have access for those in year-round industries to a program, if not the H2A program, a program that they can utilize, because right now there's very limited options for folks in those year-round industries. So as we start to wrap up and bring this in for a landing, what can we do better, right, as an industry, and how can we best advocate on this issue? So what I like to share with folks is the frequently offered excuses from policymakers on this issue. And it is, we're often met with resistance in Congress. There are some who understand it, looking to help us, but more times than not, member offices love to share any or all of these, maybe even some new ones that aren't on this list. And it's really challenging to have a meaningful conversation about how to move the needle on this issue when these types of challenges are placed before them. I have one in red because a constant theme of last Congress was they're not going to support any reform until the border is secure. The good part about this is progress has been made in that effort. The border has drastically seen improvements in that space, and now there's certainly an opportunity with the border secure and continued to have resources to be secure, that we can actually talk about reforms to the system that need to happen. And that obviously includes the agriculture visa programs. So what can you share with those folks? Obviously, it's important to share that farmers and ranchers certainly value and care about their employees. I've said it several times here, we cannot do what we do in agriculture or agriculture adjacent industries without our employees. And these employees are like family to many of our members. That being said, farmers want to take care of them. They want to provide them as much money as they can afford. But the farm economy, as those of you who follow it closely, is a challenging time right now. And we have to ensure that also provides for the sustainability of the family farm as well. And that's a critical challenge that a lot of our folks are struggling with right now to make ends meet. Congress must lead on this issue without question, but the administration does have a role in this too, and they could certainly pursue some options within their jurisdiction that I think could deliver a win to a key constituency of the president. So this could be the first time in 40 years since Ronald Reagan that we have an opportunity to really move this issue. And then finally, if nothing more, if not compelled by some of these other reasons, just in the past 5 years, we saw 140,000 farms lost. And that's not a trend that we can afford to continue as a country to remain competitive with the rest of the world, to remain, committed to national security and providing for our needs in the United States. We have to continue to make sure that there's a stable workforce for each of us, and that we can help mitigate against that if there's willingness to actually come to the table from both sides and talk about sustainable solutions here. So with that, I want to wrapped it up a little early, which is always a good thing, to allow for questions. I will share, as you may be thinking about questions or have, is to please subscribe to American Farm Bureau's Market Intel reports. All of the slides, or nearly all of the slides that I shared with you, are available publicly on our website. We have the great pleasure of working alongside 5 economists on our team who specialize in several different areas, and they do great work in putting out the latest and greatest information on agriculture policy generally, including ag labor policy. So would encourage y'all to subscribe. It is a free subscription, and hopefully you can get them as soon as they're released. So with that, Julie, thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, John Walt. So I'm just going to kind of set some context for everybody. So in our most recent economic impact study, there were 2.2 million jobs in the equine industry in the U.S. And when asked the question if additional workers were needed, the answer we got back was resoundingly yes. 125,000 more employees are needed to do full-time and part-time jobs across our industry. And so we very much want to lean in and partner with American Farm Bureau to figure out what's the solution to ensuring that we have adequate workforce out there. And we really are struggling, just as John Walt described. We've been getting a lot of phone calls over the course of the summer about fearful workers in the horse industry, not wanting to go to horse competitions or shows for fear there's going to be a raid. Concerns from backstretch workers about being on the track, all kinds of things like that. So we're definitely hearing exactly what he's described, but in a probably more in a crop kind of scenario, or even for cattle or swine or those other livestock species. So I'm just going to pause there and see if I've got any questions in the chat right now, or if anyone has a question, just raise your hand and unmute yourself and fire away. So while you guys are composing yourself, I'm going to call on Emily Stearns. Emily is our Health, Welfare, and Regulatory Affairs lead at the American Horse Council. And Emily, if you could just speak briefly about this heat regulatory issue that John Walt hit upon, because it's my understanding that that's not just people working on farms, but that could come into play for horse show organizers. So talk just a minute about who's affected.
Sure. So I would say as they work to update the OSHA heat regulations, it's like you said, it's not just for ag farm workers. So people will kind of tie it into, okay, if I'm not working hands-on with livestock, with horses, or out picking strawberries or something like that, I don't need to worry about my employees or the updated regulations. But if we are running a horse show in July, or, any time of year in Florida or Texas, and we have volunteers, we have paid staff, your judges, who are out there in the heat all day long, it'll be important to make sure we're up to date on what those OSHA regulations are. And as with any federal regulation, the state could always set their own standards that are more intense than the federal regulation. So it's important to make sure we're up to date with not just the federal regulation, but your local state regulation as well. But the main idea is, making sure there's access to shade, making sure there's access to cold water. If you're able to set work hours outside of the hottest part of the day. So if you have people coming to, strip stalls at the end of an event and it's a very hot day, if they could do it from the hours of, say, 7 to 10 a.m. instead of noon to 3, thinking of kind of common sense regulations like that, that all will start to play into what updates might be coming down the line.
And as John Walt said, we don't know that this is coming yet, but it's in the wings. So what we want to do at the American Horse Council is get you guys thinking outside the box and if this were to happen, how we might get creative in the ways that we address it. So thanks, Emily. Did you have another question for John Walt while I've got you?
I know, you've always been great, John, both for our conference and for this. It's been really great listening in.
Thank y'all. And I'll just add on the heat illness issue is that, again, of course, our farmers want to do the right thing and try to be, as responsive to the needs of our workers as possible. But our goal is to ensure that a rule is flexible to meet the needs of American agriculture. The needs of a Washington apple grower are very different than a horse owner in Florida or a row crop operation in Indiana. So there's so much diversity within American agriculture, different sizes, different commodity needs, that really could bring this one-size-fits-all policy, could really challenge that and make it difficult for everybody and not really achieve the goal that we're seeking here. So that's the goal. We'll definitely keep y'all in the loop as we hear more.
Thank you so much. Anybody else got a question for John Walt while we have a few minutes left? Okay, well, I'm going to sort of try to wrap us up here. So the American Horse Council does a number of different types of events. We do webinars, usually once a month or every other month, depending on how much materials or speakers we have available. We do a monthly podcast on Horses in the Morning Radio Network, so I encourage you to check that out because we interview some great folks. Coming up for the month of October, our topic on our podcast is going to be about horse carriage operations. And we have two great speakers, Tommy Dole from Palmetto Carriages in Charleston and Ben Spigot from New Orleans Carriage Works. And they'll be talking a little bit about the carriage industry and some of the challenges that they're facing and some of the wonderful things they contribute to some of these historical towns and exposing people to horses through the carriage operations. The following month, we have a webinar that's titled Internships, Good for Students and Good for the Industry. The American Horse Council has a very robust internship program. I think this semester I've got 12 interns working on about 8 or 10 projects, and they do some fantastic work for us, and we're so grateful for how they help us with some of the research that we couldn't otherwise get done. So look for that. Our podcast is on volunteers, and we're going to pick the brains of some experts who are going to talk to us about how we recruit, retain, attract volunteers, keep them happy, keep them engaged. So look forward to that. And I think I saw someone say that they wanted to ask a question. Somebody out there, did I see?
Well, Julie, they did put it in the chat, and the basically the question was, would it be ever possible to make the whole process easier to get foreign workers into the U.S., even if it's temporary? And the short answer is yes. I believe that we could do that. We were already seeing with DOL's announcement of that Office of Immigration Policy. That is largely an attempt to streamline that process, make it easier, and also make it easier to troubleshoot issues that you may be having in that petitioning process. But you've captured the real problems with the current guest worker programs as they currently sit. As one, they're bureaucratic. It currently, for the H-2A program specifically, it takes 3 different federal agencies plus your state workforce agency and those different touch points to actually get an H-2A worker to the farm. And that is so wild and complicated. That's why 50 to 60% of the H-2A workers come through on either through an association or through farm labor contractors, because the farm and ranch cannot possibly navigate, or they choose to just say, I can't spend the staff time and the abilities to be able to do that. I don't have a staff. I don't have time to do it. I'm just going to pay even more to a farm labor contractor or an association to do that work. So that's been a tenet of our reform efforts, whether it's been through administrative or legislative avenues, is to, hey, let's streamline this process to where it's a lot easier to navigate. And two, let's talk about the cost of this program. No other visa program we have has the amount of cost on the employer like the H-2A program has. But let's talk about agriculture overall. Let's try to get access for all of agriculture, and let's have some safeguards in place for the domestic workforce, but let's make it fair for everybody involved, not lopsided like it is now.
John Walt, I'll just add a side personal story. When our office was right downtown in Washington, D.C., the tenant in the office next to us was one of those people that someone paid to go do all that standing in line and all of that paperwork and everything that was there. And I was just shocked at how many clients he had. I mean, he could, he could lose sleep every day because he had so many people that needed his services. So it's fascinating to see how desperate people are to get workers, and then they pay even more to get somebody else to kind of handle all that.
Well, that's right. But just because these are highly technical issues, and you want to do it the right way, and that shows, I think, the commitment that this industry largely has to getting it right. They want to do things the right way as much as they can. But when the cost gets so high and the process gets so burdensome, many farmers we've heard anecdotally are just saying it's not worth it anymore. And that's what we want to try to avoid is where folks, so many of our farm families have to make that decision.
Yeah, indeed. Well, okay. Anybody else questions? By all means, we will have the recording available to you. John Walt's contact information is there. So if you want to follow up with him offline, I'm sure he'd be happy to chat with you about that. If you have topics that you'd like for us to cover in future webinars, we'd love to hear from you. Drop a note to info@horsecouncil.org. I know a hot topic right now are trades and tariffs, and we're watching those very closely. We've heard a lot from our constituents out there in the industry about the pinch they're feeling from trades and tariffs, and actually movement of horses, whether horses are coming in or out of the country, and all the things that go along with making that happen, and the increased cost associated with that. So we're talking about a topic like that maybe for a future webinar, but we're always interested in hearing what are the issues that are affecting you guys, and what you'd like to learn more about, so that we can get some speakers in on that. So with that, I want to thank John Walt and the American Farm Bureau Federation for being such great partners and for giving of their time and their expertise to share with you guys. And we hope that you will join us again next month when we have our next webinar. So with that, thank you for attending, and have a lovely rest of your day. Bye.